Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Out of Home Day Part 2. Before I introduce our, our first speaker, Frank Abellini, President of Ad Club, I just wanted to say this is a pretty spectacular day. We have over 410 attendees today. So let's hear it for virtual meetings. Frank, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Abellini, as Leith said, and I am president of Ad Club. So nice to see such a big crowd for our second Ad Club 2020 Out of Home Day webinar. As many of you know, Ad Club is a volunteer organization that exists to support the many facets of the advertising and marketing industry with our outstanding variety of annual events. Our events usually generate revenue through paid attendance and sponsorships, and at the end of each year, our profits go to support dozens of student scholarships, along with a substantial donation to our very good friends at NABS. So while many of those typical in-person events are on hold these days, we've decided that since we're hosting these events online with very few event-related costs, I'm extremely happy to say that all of the revenue that's being generated today through sponsorship sales is going directly to NABS. So for anyone that's sponsored and anyone that's considering sponsoring future events, thank you very much. Your sponsorship dollars are going to help people in need. Now, as president of Ad Club and also someone that works in the out-of-home industry, I'm extremely proud of our Out-of-Home Day committee for pushing forward with these webinars. Today's event will include a number of expert panelists while they discuss the current and future direction of programmatic advertising in Canada. Sit back, relax, and don't be afraid to use the Q&A feature to ask questions and get involved in the conversation. Daniel Mack, take it away.
In a world where chaos reigns supreme and everything feels like it's falling apart, a world where consumers have changed their buying habits and the way that they behave, media planners and buyers are lost, they are confused, they are tired. The people cry out, "We need a solution, we need a hero." The industry heeds their call. The leaders of tomorrow have introduced a powerful tool to help the oppressed. Programmatic digital out-of-home is the answer. And the hero? Well, there's more than one, and they're here to bring light where there was once darkness. Nikki Stone is the apex predator. Johnny Milne is the data guy. Dillon as the supplier. Kevin McDonald as the CEO, and Edith Gagne as the pioneer, and leading them all, introducing Paul Gittens as the moderator. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm Paul Gittens, the VP of Sales at Allvision, Canada's premium pure play digital out-of-home media company, leading in geographic coverage and large format digital out-of-home in the GTA, and providing 32 million daily impressions available for purchase across the Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver markets. Today, we'll be speaking with an expert panel of individuals who, along with their organizations, are leading the programmatic charge in out-of-home. Before we get started, for those who have questions, I would ask that you use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible after the discussion panel. With that said, I'd like to introduce the panel. Nikki Stone, EVP at Publicis, Kevin McDonald, CEO, Kinetic Worldwide Canada, Dillon, Director of Digital Transformation at Outfront, Edith Gagne, VP, Programmatic Sales Operations at Broadsign, and Johnny Milne, Product Director at MIQ Canada. So let's begin. My first question, what kind of trends did you see before the lockdown, during the lockdown, and what do you see that's happening now that things are opening up? I'd like to direct that question to Nikki.
Hello. I think life pre-COVID seems like such a distant memory right now. But sort of, pre-lockdown, I think, what we saw was out-of-home spends were definitely growing. The focus was very location-based. And during COVID, that was definitely a blur. Felt like a lot of cancel, shift, replans throughout. Clients didn't want to come across as being insensitive, flogging another new item while people were in the thick of losing their jobs, which was absolutely the right thing to do. So cancel, shift, replan sort of became the way of life. But now things are opened up, and we've seen an increase definitely around digital boards and programmatic, mostly because there's a sort of sense of security with it, where if this looming second wave comes, there's a lot more flexibility to offer to clients. And so, we're seeing a lot of focus that's like hyper local, even down to some neighborhood executions, which is very fascinating. And the reasons is that each market has had such unique patterns in their traffic since they've reopened the markets, that really getting into that granularity has been a way to drive success. So a great example, and I found this particularly humorous, was barbershop traffic. When we looked at Canada as a whole, barbershop traffic was down 24%. And however, if we broke that down into provinces, Alberta had barbershop traffic up 22%. So clearly the men of Alberta are taking way better care of themselves than anywhere else in Canada. But Ontario barbershop traffic down 47%. So, I'll hand it to Johnny, because I think he knows some really great insights as to like more around that. But I said hyper local because the patterns have been so different.
Yeah, Johnny, you probably also know a lot just because you also have the best hair here too, right? So barbershop, so.
Yeah, and you know what? I never cut it, but I used my best shampoo this morning for this very panel. But yeah, Nikki, and I think you touched on it too, and it's really interesting. As we entered the pandemic, what we noticed, because we're monitoring all major points of interest in Canada, so over 20,000 brand store locations, and we're monitoring most of the programmatically accessible digital out-of-home screens from east to west coast. That's about 12,000 screens. What we saw as the pandemic started up is slowly over time, distance traveled really cut down. So the distance that people were willing to travel to a point of interest, so a store location, the distance people were traveling from home to a board also shortened. And you touched on that, Nikki. You said neighborhood, and I find that really interesting, because what we're seeing is that there's a big opportunity in leveraging some of that neighborhood audience data. So that can be the StatsCan data, that can be census-based data, Vivid data, Environics, et cetera. But because people are staying closer to home, that neighborhood composition is a really good indicator of how to activate on audiences. So if you have that neighborhood data, you can activate on those audiences in their neighborhoods, because that's where they are right now. I find that really interesting, in addition to the availability of user journeys. As far as, individual screens, it's ebbed and flowed, right? I think things have returned to pre-pandemic norms as far as overall exposure. Comb released a report as well. Different markets saw increased exposure over time. So Montreal and Quebec got closer to parity with pre-pandemic norms about a month ago. Toronto was a little bit slower they're still below about 10%, minus 8%. But there's a real opportunity, because what we're seeing in the data is that boards are seeing exposure. Just those audiences may be more subjugated to their neighborhoods. And so I know, whereas before I was traveling from the beaches down to the West End and back and being exposed to many boards along the way, now I'm traveling within my neighborhood and being exposed to the boards in my neighborhood. So I'm leaving the house. Sometimes it's a matter of survival. I've got to leave the house multiple times a day, and I'm being exposed to boards, but it's in my neighborhood for sure. And we've seen the same, Nikki. It was interesting. Like, as late April, May, we're seeing significant uptick at grocery stores, convenience stores, and actually salons and barber shops as well. So pretty interesting. And then the rest of the boards followed.
Thanks, Johnny. I'll move on to our next question, if we will. So Programmatic has really seemed the perfect platform during the COVID crisis. What are you hearing from those brands who are buying this way? Will we see a change in or the evolution of traditional buying in the near future? Kevin?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think for us at Kinetic and for our clients, certainly since COVID has been a thing, we've definitely seen a big change in the adoption to programmatic and digital out of home, driven mostly by the flexibility to get in and out of markets as needed. Obviously, the lead times are a lot less. Also, clients have really liked the ability to move messages from market to market. And if there is a second wave or another lockdown, to be able to turn off and pause. Certainly not saying that static is dead by any means, but it's certainly changing. We've got about 25 clients that are active right now on our DSP. And what we've seen actually is prior to COVID, our billings were about 30% digital, 70% static. It's now probably closer to 65 digital, 35% static. And I think that the buying and planning has really changed, and it probably will change, and it's going to stay like this until at least there's a vaccine or cases go way down. Even with this happening, programmatic and digital out of home, I think, is advanced by at least a year to 2 years just out of necessity, certainly just in the last 6 months. So there's been a lot of development and a lot of adoption we've kind of been forced into just to be able to get that message out there. And just while I have this audience, I'm going to get on my soapbox. I think we as an industry need to work really, really closely together. There is a perception out there by clients, certain creative agencies, that at a home, the numbers are way, way down and no one's outside. That's absolutely not the case. If I live in Toronto, so if you live in Toronto, go out for a drive on the 401 or the Gardner at 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. and tell me that no one's outside. Obviously, that's not the case. It's just you need to be buying it differently. So leverage your social media, leverage relationships you have with the agencies, with clients, but we need to do a good job as an agency to get the word out there that traffic is certainly back up and out-of-home's making a big comeback. So,
thanks, Kevin. Nikki, do you want to chirp in here and?
Sure. I mean, Kevin, I think you just really nailed it. Somebody asked me today if the traffic was back on the 407, and I was like, yes. Billboard traffic is up. As a general statement, people are definitely out and they're definitely driving places. Transit might still be a little bit low, but driving is definitely up. But it's interesting, the changes that we've seen. I mean, programmatic has allowed no minimums, no 4-week commits, no static fee production. So you can be nimble and you can create really interesting pieces of creative and when you create interesting pieces of creative specific to the out-of-home space, I mean, they deliver so well in terms of return on ad spend. So this, and I think Kevin really honed in on it and said, like, the industry's come so far in such a short period of time as a result, and we're definitely seeing a lot more than that. You can connect, track, target at any level, which is relevant now more than ever because the patterns have changed. Consumer buying habits have changed. So using the data in order to understand that behavior, really impactful to your campaign results. I think too, there's a misconception about what you can do in programmatic, and is it static versus? And it's not. So I think that's part of it is we're being able to talk to clients differently and educate them a little bit differently to say, like, static can be part of your programmatic campaign. You can triangulate those boards still the same way and then use your retargeting around part of that and do some really interesting executions with that. So, it's just been a matter of that evolution, and it's been really great to see the evolution happen at like hockey stick rates.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that input, Nikki. I'll move on to the next question. How do you see programmatic affecting the workforce, both on the agency and the operator side? Back to you, Nikki. What do you think?
You're putting me in the hot seat over here, Paul. Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer this, candidly. I think the question is, where does the vendor community see it? Because programmatic out of home seems a bit like the radio audio streaming debate that's been happening for some time. Is it a digital product or a radio product first? And programmatic out of home, is it a digital product first or an out of home product first? And it begs the questions, who's best suited to execute it? A digital person or an out of home person? So I think that question's probably best answered by an Edith or a Brendan.
Well, so we wanted two perspectives. We wanted to know what it looked like on the agency side, and then what it looked like on the operator side. So, Edith, you can definitely pick up from there, or Brendan.
Yeah, I love this question because it concerns the day-to-day work that the humans that we work with every day face. And like many other industries, we're obviously undergoing a significant transformation, and it has implications for how you do your job every day. And what I've enjoyed most since taking on this programmatic platform endeavor a few years ago is seeing it from both sides of the equation. I think that what we see is new structures being built and a need for training and education on both the buy side and the sell side. There's business processes that have been built historically around the way things operated, and it leaves people exactly like the question you just posed, Nikki, which product is it? Because I have organizational structures that are built around these products. And so I think it's going to take some time for that to change and evolve. And I think the key message there, regardless of which side of the equation, whether you're on the sell side or the buy side, you need to really lean in on your technology providers to give you some training and some insight, and ask for that a lot. I think a big part of the value proposition that we can bring is training to sales teams. We have to be able to answer those questions and provide that support, because it can be uncomfortable to not really understand, where do I fit in to this equation and this ecosystem, and is it all going to change? Is it rendering me obsolete in any way? And it's not, but it's a major transformation. So I think it's it highlights the need to ask for training and education.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that too, Edith, just kind of building off what you said. I do like this question as well. And from a vendor or supplier side, I think with technology obviously comes change. For Outfront, programmatic has definitely helped us as a company create new roles, ones that definitely weren't on the table a year ago. And I think there's going to be a lot more new roles coming down the pipe in the year and years to come. I think it's also helped evolve a lot of traditional roles. I think from a vendor side or supplier side, it's important to remember that programmatic for us it's another transaction channel. There's still other ways to transact with Outfront and activate on our supply, but the opportunity that programmatic presents to us, which is still relatively new in the digital out-of-home space, is kind of twofold. It's the ability to appeal to a potentially new client base, or allows us to handle preference to migrate toward programmatic buying for certain clients. So we're seeing a lot of new clients activating on our supply, to Kevin's point, which is amazing, just especially over the last few months. Within the last 9.5 months since I joined Outfront, again, there's been a lot of new roles that have presented themselves, really tailored around helping sell, service, and manage this new buy type, mine included actually. And to Edith's point, a lot of upskilling has been happening internally across many departments at Outfront. And I think that's the path forward. That's how we're going to move the needle. At the end of the day, us as a media owner, we're going to take the steps necessary to be as prepared as we can and aligned internally to meet the buy side essentially where they want to be met, and however they want to transact, that's how we have to align internally.
I was going to add on that. I think part of your question was affecting the workforce on the operator side, so media partners. I think the pink elephant in the room, and it's certainly been a hot topic of programmatic out of home, is what role do the reps play, right? And I think that has been something that no one really wants to address. There was this perception that, oh, programmatic's going to be like a set it and forget it, and do we even need reps because all this money is just kind of coming in? That's not the case at all. We've done a lot of PMP deals, a lot of programmatic guarantees. We are constantly talking to our reps. I think as a sales rep, getting in front of agencies and constantly talking about your value, new assets that you guys are getting in the marketplace, that conversation is happening a lot more than people thought, because there was this perception, certainly last year at Out of Home Day, that programmatic was going to be a rep killer and it was going to take the reps out of the equation and we were just going to work with the exchange. That's not the case. We rely on our reps very heavily. And again, I would say probably 60% of the activity that we do is done through PMPs or programmatic guarantees, and that's all done with the sales team. So I think that's an important thing, because Nikki's right. You know, anytime there's been a change to an industry, whether it's radio, whether it's digital, or whether it's out of home, there's always this, okay, so how do I fit into this equation? How does it look for me in the new world? But I want people to hear it reassuring from us that we certainly value those relationships and we rely on them a lot heavily.
Nice, thanks for that, Kevin. How does the group feel about standardization and programmatic impressions and the counts? Johnny.
Okay, I can kick this off. Yeah, and you know what? I think Edith has some great context here as well, so I'll pass it right over to you, Edith. Mm-hmm. But what I've found interesting is that, you know, even in the early days of programmatic display, there was a lot of talk around the impression itself and the accuracy of the impression and the cost of the impression. And I think a lot of great people and smart people are doing great work to standardize those multipliers, right from COMB providing circ numbers, the screen owners signing up for those studies, passing those on to teams, Edith's teams, to surfacing those in the DSPs. The DSPs are doing great work, taking those daily, weekly circ numbers, indexing them to hour, using dwell times. So there's a ton of work being done to ensure the impression is accurate. But what I find interesting from my perspective is, and I think where the conversation might start going, is also into how valuable that impression is for driving return on investment. And that's what happened in display. At first, it was all about the impression, the cost of the impression, guaranteed impressions, direct buys. And then it started moving towards cost per click, cost per acquisition, the value, and someone taking action. And I think we're starting to see that then, in addition to just talking about multipliers, showing the true value of 1,000 impressions in programmatic digital out of home, and whether that's driving store visitation, whether that's driving web activity, and which strategies, which audiences, which impressions, which screens are driving that performance. So I think there's a ton of work being done on both fronts, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, those are great points. And I interestingly too, the DSP can play a role in helping, you know, sort of expose a standardization. It makes it very obvious if something stands out. You know, it's easy for the DSP to have a role in calling that out, because you're displaying everything in sort of one aggregated platform. So you can't have comparable inventory that's reporting something that's way off. You'd have to call it out, right? So there's certainly a value to that. I think that, you know, standardization and reliable impressions is kind of like the holy grail. Like we have a lot of that, but the methodologies are not identical across the board. So there's still some work to be done there. But at the same time, the caveat that I would add is that, you know, maybe it's not always the best approach to put too much weight on being overly granular with out of home, because that's not necessarily the only strategy that should be looked at. If we're looking at out of home and trying to measure it in, the same way that we measure online, and, I encounter this question all the time because, we focus on really pitching the product to people who are not familiar with out of home, and they have that tendency. And sometimes we play a role in educating around other values, like you can be surrounding an event, you can be surrounding, certain types of environments, and really focus on the return on investment, and maybe not so much heavily focused on the granularity of the impression that you're trying to get, right?
Edith, is that your dog, or is that like Elaine or Kramer's dog in the background?
It's not mine. I don't have a dog.
Okay. I heard a dog bark.
Wasn't here.
So guys, what are your thoughts on the Canadian programmatic landscape in comparison to other markets like the US, the UK, or Asia and Pacific? Kevin, you want to chirp in on this?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for us at Kinetic, one of the things that we've been doing during COVID is working with the other Kinetic offices from around the world, really just on developing tools and technology and sharing overall best practices with the goal of emerging from COVID stronger than when we went in. By doing so, we really spent a lot of time with those countries and really got to understand what DSPs were they using in the market, what does the media owners look like as far as being connected to an exchange. And in my opinion, we as Canada are actually ahead versus a lot of other countries. The percentage of media owners that are on an exchange here in Canada is much higher, way higher than the percentage in other countries. And the percentage of their assets that are on an exchange was also significantly higher. So we've done a lot of work in UK, Germany, France with some of our sister offices. And one of the things that was really interesting for us is that, yes, it's out-of-home, digital out-of-home is very big there, but the percentage of inventory that they make available on an exchange is drastically less than what we have. And if you look across Canada, we've got roughly 15,000 digital screens that are connected to a network. And percentage-wise, that's way, way higher than a lot of countries. Now, sheer dollars, obviously they are higher, but the percentage of agency billings that's being bought programmatically or digital is also higher in Canada, at least in our case. So, there is this perception that Canada is always lagging behind in all the work that we've done with other countries. It wasn't the case at all. In fact, from a percentage standpoint, we were a lot higher.
I tend to disagree, Kevin.
Might as well.
I don't disagree that the infrastructure is there, and I think that's actually been an amazing news story, especially right now, which has allowed us for that hockey stick sort of adoption that I was referencing out earlier. But I think our adoption rate until now was terribly slow. And so I think that it was a case of if you build it, they will come mindset, and and the perfect storm of a terrible circumstance around the world that really forced people to consider a different way of buying today, which is why it has really driven the adoption rate. Thankfully, as Kevin pointed out, the infrastructure was here and the availability was here. But would the adoption rate be where it is today if it wasn't for COVID?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think where we are now versus 6 months ago is drastically different. The fact that we had the infrastructure here and set up, and COVID kind of pushed us into this adoption into programmatic out of home. But from a media owner standpoint, we saw so many countries where media owners made like 5 to 10% of their screens available on an exchange.
Yes.
But yeah, 6 months ago, I agree with you 100%, Nikki. I think where we are now is so much further ahead.
Okay.
You know what? I'll jump in there too. I think there's kind of a unique, perhaps just because of the size of our market, I'm not sure. But I think when I speak to other countries and other markets about out of home and the solutions that are being applied to out of home and programmatic digital out of home, sometimes they sound behind just as far as proving incremental value and planning insights and advanced activation, and then the measurement. Because I think in part because of the size of our market in Canada, some traditional out-of-home shops have partnered with some intelligence companies, have partnered with DSPs, have partnered with screen suppliers, and there's a sharing of information and data amongst all those parties that I just haven't really heard of in other markets. And that is leading to some unique solutions where when I speak to other countries, they're asking for our insights and they're asking for our thought leadership, and that's coming out of Canada and our partnership. So I find that pretty interesting.
So you'd say on your side, Canada's more advanced?
From a planning and measurements perspective, for sure. And that's reliant on, you know, teams of analysts and engineers. It's reliant on transparency from the suppliers and play logs from the DSPs and fantastic supply being pushed by the traditional out-of-home agencies. So there's a ton of pieces there, but I think there's a nice combination of pieces in Canada where when you speak to other markets, they're actually very impressed and just looking for thought leadership.
I agree with that too. And especially we kind of have an interesting mix of tech suppliers, you know, and that's a good thing. It brings a lot of education opportunities and exposure on the publisher side, which we don't see in every market. If, you know, the kind of offerings that are available in different markets are rather, you know, similar, it exposes you to one kind of offering. Whereas here, you know, we've had multiple DSPs, different approaches. And I think that on the sell side, you know, publishers had the opportunity to get comfortable with the open exchange, with PMPs, different ways of doing things. And for that reason led to maybe a little bit more openness to going ahead and exposing the networks programmatically. So.
Edith, what are you guys seeing at Broadsign? Are you guys seeing, like, where does Canada rank when you look at other markets that you guys are in? Sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to like steal your question there, but Paul's still the moderator.
Don't you worry.
Yeah, no, well, I tend to side with, you know, Canada being pretty ahead. There's been a really great reception on both on the buy and the sell side towards transacting with, you know, the bespoke campsite digital out-of-home DSP. We're seeing, you know, a lot of growth with omni-channel DSPs in other markets. I haven't seen a ton of that here. I think it's going to come. And in terms of COVID recovery, we're seeing a lot of traction in some of the European markets too, which is good. It's a little bit slower on the North American side in terms of overall transactions, but definitely in recovery mode. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what, and you know what, sorry, you guys are inspiring me. An example might be on the planning side. In the UK, GDPR has taken away some of their abilities to really lean on the device ID. So in the UK, often you're seeing context and web activity informing programmatic digital out of home, or even traditional. In America, not as many rules, a lot of geolocation, a lot of PII planning. In Canada, you have your future-proofed offline data sets like Environics. You've got your geolocation data sets that scale, and then you've also got web activity trends. So we're using all of that, and part of it is because of our privacy laws kind of skirt in between those laws. Part of it is just because Canada is always watching what other countries are doing and taking some of the best out of each. You know, it's a little bit of all this maybe, but it's pretty interesting just from an analytics point of view to see all of those methodologies being used in Canada.
Thanks, Johnny. What do you anticipate the future of programmatic digital out-of-home? Do you foresee programmatic being used for all out-of-home trading, including static? Edith, what do you think?
Yeah, well, obviously I have big aspirations for programmatic out of home, but I think, you know, if it comes down to the ultimate promise of what programmatic is all about for digital out of home, and whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, it comes down to increased fluidity, right? Like the ability for the sell side to tap into new budgets and the ability for the buy side to have the flexibility they need to reach the audiences they need and amplify their message. And I think that that's really the promise of digital out of home. And is there a place for static in there? I personally think that that would be amazing. And I totally see a way for that to occur. Obviously, you know, that could leave some people wondering, like, what the hell, there's no real time capabilities on putting up a static ad for sure. But there's something that can still be automated around that transaction process. And the whole promise there is operational efficiency. And there's certainly a gain that can be made there on all fronts, whether we're talking digital or static. That said, I don't think that ever would replace, I don't think we can say that everything will become programmatic. You can't turn back the clock on technology advancements that actually render things more efficient. There's no going back on that, and that's a good thing. But it doesn't replace the need for individual representation like we were alluding to before. I think there's a lot of value in networks having that one-to-one relationship with organizations like Kevin's, like you were saying, you rely on those publisher partnerships, of course. And you'll always have that need to have a deeper understanding of what the capabilities of the networks are, which isn't necessarily something that shines through in an aggregated forum. So I do see a future where it's going to get a lot bigger and it's not going away, and it will include more inventory. I think people are still wrapping their heads around, you know, what are the gains and what is the real potential, and that we're still in that process. But it's certainly not going away, that's for sure.
Thanks. Brendan, did you want to chirp in on this one for you? Yeah, thanks.
Covered off pretty much everything I was going to say, but I agree with you in the sense of definitely growth for the programmatic digital out-of-home space. I like Nikki's reference of the hockey stick growth up and to the right. I think that's going to happen and continue to happen for the next couple of years. I think there's a few bigger dominoes that still need to fall. Edith, you mentioned it as well. Some of the bigger omni-channel DSPs start to become more active in the space. And once programmatic digital out-of-home truly becomes part of that omni-channel conversation, couple that with the big omni-channel DSPs getting involved and just overall more adoption, I think the next couple of years are going to be super exciting in this space for both the buy side and the sell side. On the static question, I think in terms of being used for static, programmatic will definitely drive some enhancements in terms of just automating it. But regardless of the transaction process, static is static and it's reliant on a human being sent out to post copy. So it can never truly become real time. But certainly the buy sell process, I think, can be more automated, and I think it will become more automated. So when you layer on that automation with increased data and demographic information for these static assets, I think that equals a pretty big evolution that's happening already and is really coming for that product.
Well said. Well said.
That's it, yeah. Thank you. So what is the number one thing you want the industry to know about programmatic out of home? So Johnny, I'm gonna throw that one to you.
The number one, wow, okay, great question. I think programmatic digital out of home and out of home in general, and these are through, you know, my own observations over the last 2 years, those campaigns are driving value for brands. And, you know, when we perform incremental lift analysis, it's the out-of-home channel that I see again and again driving value for clients. And these are just my own observations. And that's comparing exposed audiences exposed to these campaigns with control audiences who are not. I see positive lift numbers on the back of these campaigns every time, which is incredible because that's not the case for every single channel. And I think, you know, just piggybacking on Kevin's earlier point, people are out and about. We see it in the geolocation data. People are being exposed to these boards. Their behaviors are slightly different. They're traveling within their neighborhoods, but they're being exposed to this advertising. So, you know, I might even ask a question back to the group, but if you think of a campaign, a universal campaign, like the Ontario COVID awareness campaign, the Wear a Mask campaign, that campaign is maybe one of the only true omni-channel campaigns happening right now, in that it's literally spanning every single channel, broadcast, all digital channels, out of home. I will tell you for myself anyways, that my brand recall in terms of which channel do I remember when I think of that ad, for me, it's out of home, for sure. I think of the bus shelters that I've seen. I think of the billboards that I've seen. And so, and I have no reason to be biased to this channel. We're an omni-channel company. We perform analysis across all channels, but I think people have been scared a little bit about out of home, maybe in part by virtue of the name of the channel. They figure we're all inside, so nobody's out of home. So let's pull budgets. And I know it's a lot more complex than that, but people are outside. They're just traveling in different patterns. And I think if Warren Buffett were a programmatic media trader, he would be buying programmatic digital out of home right now, for sure. Because the price floors are low, there's avails, and it drives results.
You know, Paula, if you don't mind if I chime in on that, I think there's two things that Johnny, I mean, spot on. But there's two things that I would love for people to remember. And the first is to invest in your out-of-home creative. First and foremost, like all out-of-home creative, it performs substantially better when it's designed for that environment. You would not take a TV commercial and try to put it in radio. Stop trying to shove your other media creative in this space. Invest into it. It will pay dividends. But second is we do a newsletter around, and there's an out-of-home segment in it, and it became rather interesting that it's now becoming its own little magazine that we're doing. And I was writing some content for it today and came across a really good bit of research that was shared with me. And the title of the research was "The World's Most Successful Brands Use Out-of-Home and Why You Should Too." And it was so telling. If the objective of your brand is growth, you need out-of-home. They took 2,000, this particular case study took 2,000 other case studies. And when they pulled them all together, what they found was that, and it wasn't an out-of-home study, so let me just caveat there, it's to say this was actually not an out-of-home based study. It was a study about the analysis of overall effectiveness. And when out-of-home was layered in with other media types, the effectiveness of that campaign overall was just staggeringly better. And some of those things were like sales activation. You could do it on brand recall. You could look at it from core brand building, 47% uplift in short-term sales, 30% more market share, 26% increased profit, 15% new customers. Those are staggering numbers that why are you not putting 15, 20% of your budget into out-of-home?
Yeah, Nikki, I love your point on the creative. The amount of times I've driven on the Gardner and seen these big, beautiful digital signs, and you drive by and you see something like, oh, that's cool. And I have no idea who the company is because the logo's not big enough. The color contrast is wrong. So I think yeah, that's shoving it, other creative into out of home is an interesting term, but yeah, an investment on that would be really good because there's a lot of wasted opportunities with the wrong creative.
So guys, this concludes our part of the panel. And I'd like to take a look at some of the questions that came through on the Q&A, if possible. One of the questions that came through are all suppliers using the same methodology for calculating impressions? And how do comb numbers fit into the programmatic metrics? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
I can jump in there. There's comparable methodologies. Not all suppliers use the same providers. Most of the large suppliers are working with Comb. But as I alluded to before, one of the roles that we play as a tech platform is to ensure, you know, comparability and methodology across the board, and ensure that we're reporting numbers that we're comparing apples to apples when we're reporting back on a DSP. I think that's really the key part. And you know, raising some questions when, you know, with regards to the sources of how the information is gathered. We're not really in a position as a market, and nor is any market that I've seen, where, you know, we're looking at real-time impression data that's granular and specific, and you're serving an ad to that. It's just not there. It's historical data in almost exclusively all cases. But that doesn't make it any less reliable. It's you know, it's robust, reliable information, and the tech platforms play a big role in ensuring an extra layer of sort of verification and validation of that information.
Yeah, from the media owner side, Edith, we do obviously lean on Comb for all of our cert numbers, as I believe all the big guys do. I think it goes back to the point of standardization across the tech platforms that we're using to standardize those impression counts. I think that's very important moving forward. And it's something that we've opened up conversations with. We had a meeting a few months ago about it, but I think it's something that needs to be front and center moving forward.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. For those out-of-home companies that aren't members of Comb, I think the DSPs, so Broadsign and Vistar and Highstack, have done a good job to help try to corral all of those media owners and try to have some normalcy to those numbers when Comb's not available. So having those channel-specific DSPs come in has actually brought a lot of value to that too.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks. If nobody else wants to chirp in, I'll go to another question that came through. When do you think that the omnichannel DSP will be the preferred way to buy programmatic out of home?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
I'll jump in on that only because we've had this conversation with, I'd say, probably our top 15 clients in the last 6 months. So obviously we've got 3 channel DSPs in the marketplace, and we've got omni-channel DSPs like Trade Desk coming in and other ones like that who are going to connect into various SSPs to access that out-of-home inventory. I think a lot depends on who the client is, and I think from what we've also seen is how big of a static program does the client have, because right now our clients are very happy with channel-specific DSPs, because then from a reporting standpoint, we keep it as an out-of-home in total, looking at both static and digital. I think that as the omni-channel DSPs come into the marketplace and connect into those SSPs and connect into the exchanges, they're going to innovate. They're going to invest into the right UX as well. And then I think so much, again, it depends on the client, but I think where out-of-home does really have an opportunity there is for clients who maybe aren't necessarily a big out-of-home player, to be able to get some of maybe traditional digital dollars where clients are buying an audience regardless of delivery type, whether it's mobile or traditional digital or digital out of home. That could be a big advantage for out of home. But I think to answer the question, we're at least in our area, we're probably at least a year or 2 away. But again, I think a lot depends on the client and what they're trying to achieve.
A lot of it also depends on the DSP's ability and willingness to adopt appropriate out-of-home workflows as well. And that's really been the sort of raison d'etre of the bespoke digital out-of-home DSPs, is to sort of, highlight what those workflows look like and but of course, then it's channel specific. And I think there's going to be a place or a future for some time now where the specialized channel DSPs sort of drive the innovation that's really specific to that channel. And it takes a bit more time for the omni-channel DSPs to, adopt and build upon and integrate those workflows into their businesses as well. And that's what we're seeing, across the board.
Yeah, actually, another point on that is there's a lot of clients that obviously have their own DMPs that want to connect into those omni-channel DSPs. And so we're going to have clients that not necessarily force us to be using those omni-channel DSPs, but strongly suggest it. So I think a lot depending is also on the client's own personal use of their own data and who they've connected to from an omni-channel DSP standpoint.
Okay, I've got another one for you guys. This one came in. Do you think that place-based digital out-of-home is more relevant now because of the COVID crisis over, say, any other digital out-of-home? Did somebody want to tackle that question?
That's interesting. We were touching on that a bit at the beginning, in that because audience user journeys are shorter right now, I think a place-based approach in terms of defining audience can actually work quite well. So taking neighborhood data and using that to activate on an audience, and that in a sense is place-based. I think what we've also seen in the data is cross-visitation has shrunk. So if you're looking, if I, prior to the pandemic, would visit a home retailer like an IKEA, I might also visit a Home Depot and Lowe's, let's say. Now for every 100 visitors to an IKEA, we're maybe seeing only 10, 15, let's say, visit a Home Depot, and then not the third brand, for example. There's not as much cross-visitation. For that reason, what's my point? My point is that, I think we can really prioritize competitors right now. And if we're able to do that, then prioritize that primary competitor, because there really is typically now only one competitor versus multiple, let's say, and then perform efficient place-based buys if we're looking to conquest, for example. So I think there's lots of space right now for the place-based approach in programmatic as well as traditional.
Johnny, that's super insightful, because as you were saying that, I did have to go to IKEA recently. And I did all of my homework ahead of time, even down to which aisle and where in the store everything was, and then wrote it out on my list so that I could get through the store as quickly and efficiently as humanly possible. And it was my only stop. I was like, I'm there, and then I'm straight back home. And I think you're absolutely right that when we do leave our houses today, we go out for an intentional purpose. Unless we're just taking a walk or going to be one with nature, running through the trails or whatever that might look like. But otherwise, it's very intentional. There's less multi-stops or browsing, and you're being very definitive about where you're willing to go and the exposure that you're willing to put yourself into. So you're saying, I need this is where I'm going. So
yeah, and I think just on, when we talk about, Nikki had talked about at the start with salons, but if you look at audiences, let's say in convenience stores or residential from a place-based standpoint, those have stayed super strong. In fact, have seen no decrease in a lot of cases in audience, because if you live in a condo, those numbers, if anything, there's way more people at home. There's people going into convenience stores for essentials in the heart of the lockdown. A lot of those numbers didn't change. So I think, to answer the question, during COVID, place-based has been super, super important, but it's the right type of place-based.
Yeah,
right.
Data-supported place-based for sure.
Yeah.
So guys, I think we got time for one last one I'd like to throw out. How can we continue to educate our clients that programmatic out of home isn't bad, right? Like how do we continue to educate them?
education.
Yeah, lean on everyone on this call and all of our companies. I mean, we all have so many resources at our fingertips.
And push for clarity also, right? Like if you're being pitched something, whether you're on the sell side or the buy side, ask the questions, ask to be shown what the value is. And if you don't understand it, you're not the only person in the room that doesn't understand it. Ask again and insist.
Yeah. The technology is super cool, and it's great at delivering results. And I think if you just have the time to take clients through it and really get them over the hurdle of just using it, the adoption, especially now during COVID, is pretty strong. So yeah, education. Call your local media partners, talk to your agencies. And again, if we don't have the answers, we'll get the answers.
Yeah. And lean on your tech partners. Absolutely.
Yeah, for
We're
sure.
there for that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. So that concludes our questions today. I'd like to thank our panel. And in closing remarks, I'd like to hand it over to Leith Mason, the chair of Out of Home Day 2020. Leith, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you very much. What a great, amazing virtual session. I think 410 people learned a whole lot today, and I expect us all to have our phones ringing off the hook with A, business, and B, questions. I also want to say a special thank you to all of our sponsors, of course, who helped make today happen. MIQ, Johnny, wave your hand. Vistar, Kinetic, Kevin, wave your hand. Pipestack, Clue, Adapt, and Movia. Thank you very much, everybody. You were amazing.
Go out of home.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us. It was
Thank
fun.
you.
Have a good one.
You guys.
Hey guys, take care.
Bye.